welcome everybody. Steve with 10 Books coming at you again with another part of our author series with Phillip Campbell with The Story of the Church. Phillip, welcome. Thank you for doing this.
I'm super glad to be here talking about this book.
Story of the Church. What made you come up with this idea to write this, outside of Tan giving you a check?
Well, this is my fifth book with Tan. Prior to this, I wrote the Story of Civilization series, which was a 4-volume series of essentially of Western history from ancient Egypt all the way up to today. And Story of Civilization basically covered secular history. I mean, we covered it from a Catholic perspective. We made sure to give appropriate space for the contributions and the individuals from the Catholic Church. But really, after the Story of Civilization was over, I was talking with the folks at TAN, and we were just thinking, there were so many great things about the church history in particular that we were unable to get to in Story of Civilization. A lot of theological stuff, a lot of liturgical stuff, a lot of the great saints and the contributions of Catholics to the building up of civilization. And we say, we need to do another book in this vein and just focus on the development of the church and not have to worry about the secular history. So this essentially functions as a church history book, kind of written in the same vein as Story of Civilization.
Do you have to have Story of Civilization to understand this one?
I don't think so. No, it's a standalone book. But I mean, if you've read Story of Civilization, it gives you an idea of what to expect when you pick up Story of the Church.
And not saying not to get the one or get both, but
yes.
What were some stories that you pulled in that wowed you? That was something like I didn't know this one. This is a pretty cool story.
Yeah, there's lots of interesting stuff in here. I was just looking through it today and kind of reviewing the stories. Like for example, did you know that did you know, Steve, there was a second Saint Benedict? Not Saint Benedict of Nursia, but there was a second Saint Benedict a few centuries later.
I want to say yes, but I don't know where he was from.
Well, you're a nerd, so you probably knew it already. But I didn't know this for a long time. There was a second Saint Benedict called Saint Benedict of Anian, and he was French, and he was a huge monastic reformer in the 9th century. And I'd heard of him before, but I didn't know how important he was. He basically reestablished the Benedictine order in a time when it had started to lose some of the rigor of Benedict's original vision. And he had such an interesting backstory. He used to be a soldier. His birth name was Witiza. He had this great barbarian name. And he was in this battle, and he got knocked into a river, and he almost drowned because of all his armor on. And he's like struggling to get out of the river, and then these peasants pull him out of the river downstream, and he came like this close to drowning. And this experience, it was like the literal come to Jesus moment where he was like, "Would I have been ready to face the judgment had I drowned right there?" And this barbarian that had been all these battles and killed these people, he was like, wow, I am not ready to meet God. And so he got rid of his armor, and he adopted the habit of the Benedictines and took the name Saint Benedict, took the name Benedict after the great saint. And then he began, founded a monastery on a very rigorous interpretation of Benedictine rule. And the Carolingian rulers of France loved this, and so they elevated Benedict of Anian as kind of like the supervisor over all the Benedictine monasteries in the kingdom. And so Benedict's own interpretation of the rule became like this normative way that all the monasteries were organized, and he basically kind of reconstituted Benedictine monasticism in the West in the 9th century. So I tell the story in the book. I have a whole historical fiction story of him falling in the river and struggling and his whole conversion. So it was a really neat story, and there's a lot of cool stories like that in the text.
I immediately went to the movie Robin Hood Men in Tights when he falls in the little stream and starts kicking around. And
yes.
Do you bring up things like, the Vendée?
Yeah, we do. We have 2 chapters on the French Revolution. We talk about the church in the age of revolution and after the revolution too, how the church kind of got its footing again after the revolution. We do talk about the Vendée uprising, and that's also talked about, by the way, in Story of Civilization chapter 3. It was hard to choose what to focus on in the French Revolution chapter, because there's so many heroes, there's so many martyrs. Like in Story of Civilization, Volume 3, we talked about the Carmelite nuns who were beheaded. In this chapter, I chose to talk about Brother Salomon Leclerc, who was a oh gosh, what order was he from? I can't find it right now. I can't remember. But he was from a religious order where all the a Lasallian brother, Saint Simon Leclerc, and he and many other priests, seminarians, and religious were all rounded up and bayoneted and shot to death by the revolutionaries. So in Volume 3, I focused on some nuns, and then on this one, I talked about these priests and brothers and what happened to them. Talk a little bit about the resistance of Vendée. So yeah, it's really interesting when we get to the modern world and you start to see the conflict between modernity and the church. On the chapter on Pius IX, I did a fictionalized story of one of the battles of the papal Zouaves. However you say it, Zouaves?
I think Swabs, yeah.
Yeah, the Pope's army.
Yeah.
I did a nice story about the papal Zouaves fighting against the Italian nationalists of Garibaldi. So there's even some battle stories in there. I know it's a church history book, but I couldn't resist writing some more stories when it was relevant.
There you go.
Yeah.
I got to ask, Blessed Pierre Noel Pignot, did he make the cut?
No, he didn't. I'm sorry. But you know what? There's a disclaimer in here. It says on the introduction, there's so many things to learn about church history. We could spend our whole lives studying it and not exhaust the rich stories and lessons. We couldn't hope to uncover the entire treasury of history in this little book. For that reason, we've had to pick and choose which saint stories and events from history to include. So please forgive us if one of your favorite saints didn't make it in.
I mean, yeah, if you did everything, I mean, what we're talking about, a 37,000 volume set, about 1,000 pages each, and that probably just covers
the book's only this. It's only this big, but what I did want to do, I didn't choose the stories willy-nilly. I mean, they're basically chosen as like cross sections or nice little exemplars of the spirit of a given age in the church, to try to give the students an idea of what it would have been like to live in that age, what the pertinent subjects and individuals were in that time period.
So what would be Philip Campbell's favorite age?
To write about or to study?
Well, we studied and wrote, but maybe to even live in.
Oh gosh, I don't know. That's hard. That's hard to live in. Gosh, probably the. I can't pick. I wanted to say probably the very early church, so I could meet some of the church fathers and see Christianity when hear it from the mouths of people who knew the apostles. But then I started thinking about like the amphitheater and the animals and stuff, and wasn't sure I want to deal with that. So
it's kind of like pick your poison. How do I want to die this year?
Yeah, like maybe I want to go with the Middle Ages, but I appreciate modern dentistry, so I don't know. It's all fascinating stuff. Every age in the church has so much to teach us, the good periods and the bad periods. And we address a lot of the bad stuff too. This doesn't try to sugarcoat the dark things in the church. As we talk about the Cadaver Synod, we talk about the confusion after the Second Vatican Council. We address, what happened to the church in the 70s. That's in here. There's a whole chapter on it called Hopes and Fears.
Now, I'm doing a series on my other channel of The Church in Crisis by Phillip Hughes. Yeah, I had a brain cramp. I'm going, The Church in Crisis. So we're doing, like yesterday we just did First Lateran Council. It took about an hour and 20 minutes. And you're going, how do we make that? How do we get out of just that period?
I know. It's some crazy stuff back there. Church history is fascinating. It's never dull. There's always these inspiring stories. There's these crazy stories. It's just such a great... That's why I was so happy that Tan let me do this. Story of Civilization was great, but I was really happy to go off. I mean, every historian wants to go off on his little tangent, You and I have a mutual friend, Ryan Grant. He also does work for TAN doing translations. That guy loves to go off on little tangents and rabbit holes, and that's what this book was, my opportunity to go off just to follow a long rabbit hole of just, being able to get away from the secular history and go through the theology and the saints and the liturgy and all that stuff, and I really enjoyed writing it.
Was there anything that didn't make the cut that you wish would have?
Yeah, there was. One of the challenges of writing church history, for the first 1,500 years, you're really focused on Europe and parts of Asia. But when you get past the age of exploration and you try our history of the church, it's like, okay, well, the church was also in South America now, and it was in Mexico and New France and China and India, and you start to go, oh my gosh, how can I possibly write the history of the church in all these areas? And so, there's a few chapters that talks about, let me see. Yeah, like I had one chapter on missions abroad. I had a chapter on, the church in the 20th century and like a couple paragraphs about the struggle in China. But man, I wish I would have been able to devote many more chapters to, the church in New France deserved an entire chapter, and it just didn't have time and space,
Your top 3 popes.
Top 3 popes.
Personal.
Yeah, personal. Pius IX, Innocent the Third. By the way, I wrote an introduction to a book on Innocent III. It's not by TAN, but if you go to Mediatrix Press, there's a biography of Innocent III. I wrote the foreword for it. One early church pope that I've learned to have a lot of respect for as I've been researching and writing is Pope St. Damasus I. He's probably the most influential pope of the late patristic period, and very influential. I believe it was under Damasus that the Synod of Rome was summoned that gave us the canon of the New Testament. Mm-hmm. So extremely influential guy. I would love to see a Pope Damasus II in the future. I'm not holding my breath, but yeah, those would be my 3, and they're all in the book.
You're gonna start a little movement for that, right?
Yeah.
PD2.
There you go.
If you had to meet one of the church doctors that you probably write about all, was it now 35, which one would you want to sit down and pick their brains for if you had an hour?
Well, I'm gonna have to give 2 answers. St. Augustine would probably be the most interesting for me to talk to. I think we'd connect intellectually, but probably I really need to talk to St. Therese of Lisieux because she'd help me straighten my life out. Yeah.
How so?
We're not gonna go into that. No, I don't know, her. She was proclaimed a doctor of the church because of her little way. Mm-hmm. Which consisted in very similar to what Benedict tried to. Saint Benedict tried to give us a formula for monasticism that made holiness attainable for your average Joe that mm-hmm. didn't have the fortitude to live in the desert and sleep on a rock and eat bugs. Mm-hmm. And I see Therese is doing something very similar. She's trying to give us a path to holiness, very attainable to the average person, not to do extraordinary things, but to do ordinary things with great love. Mm-hmm. And when I first read Story of a Soul, I was deeply moved by it. And I feel like, if I could sit down and talk to St. Therese, I feel like a lot of things in my life would become clear very quickly.
Yeah, I'm trying to get an interview with a priest in Vietnam on St. Theophane.
Oh, cool.
The original Little Flower.
Yeah.
So hopefully get that out before the Second Coming comes on. We've been playing phone tag for text tag for the last couple months. Anyways, yeah. What would you want people to read this? What would you want them to get out of this? Outside of intellectual, knowing his church history, what are some fruits you think they want?
Well, I think people have a hard time in their minds reconciling the the mission and the holiness of the church with the human element of the church, they tend to want to go to one side or the other. They want to say like they want to have like this kind of triumphalist, perfect vision of the church where it never does wrong, even if we have to close our eyes or put our head in the sand about certain things. Or they just see the church as like it's corrupt and full of sinners and simoniac priests, and it's very difficult for people to reconcile what the church is supernaturally with the human element of it. And I think this book fuses those ideas together admirably, where you see the triumphs of the church, the real triumphs, the victories of grace, and what the church has helped humankind to achieve, but it also very clearly shows you how the human element has played in the development of the church. And this is really no different, Steve, than the difficulty that early people had understanding who Christ was himself, understanding his divinity and his humanity, and that you're looking at something that looks very human. The church looks very normal. It's got buildings with bathrooms and garages and electricity and carpet and and even in the church, it's got the same thing lots of other religions have. Lots of religions have altars, they have candles, they have vestments, sacred books. But there's always more to what you're looking at. The meaning of the thing is often behind the scenes, like in the sacrament, or like in Christ himself. If you were present in the stable at Bethlehem the night he was born, he'd look just like a normal baby. The stable looked like a normal dirty stable, but it's containing the most precious treasure in the world. And so I think this book will help people to kind of get a better reconciliation of the church's divine origin and its human element, and see how the fathers of the Second Vatican Council spoke about how the church is kind of an extension of the incarnation throughout time, and that's definitely true. And so I hope that people will get that out of that they will have their faith in the supernatural origin of the church strengthened, while being able to better integrate, the human element, which is sometimes dark and dirty and sinful, but even then, even seeing the sinful things that have happened in church history, it's amazing how God, in his providence, even brings good out of those things. So it's a really uplifting story, and I hope that that's the effect it'll have on people. And I want to mention too, like the Story of Civilization books, there is an audio drama of this available, where you can listen to the text of the book with voice actors and sound effects. And also there's going to be some streaming lectures available too. I don't know when TAN's putting them out, but it'll be available on TAN Homeschool, where basically there's going to be 36 video lectures of yours truly blabbing about each chapter and kind of elaborating on the important points and offering further insight.
We like blabbing. We'll have all those links underneath in the show notes too. That was funny. What you said about that was I was at the Eucharistic Congress in Charlotte, and I had one of the ladies come up, and she's just losing her mind about the latest Pope Francis thing, and I turned to her and said, "You ever heard of Cadaver Synod?" Nope. You ever heard of Pornocracy? Nope. You ever heard of Pope John the 12th? Nope. Let me tell you something. Amazingly, she was feeling so much better after we got done. So imagine the blogosphere during those times.
Imagine if social media existed then, but what would we think if we were alive when, imagine if Pope Francis dug up the corpse of John Paul II and put it on trial, then cut its finger off and threw it in the Tiber. Like, what would we think? Thank goodness social media wasn't around in the 10th century. Yes.
Yeah. And talk about something good coming out of bad. Wasn't it John the 12th was pretty... I think he died in his lover's arms. He established Cluny, right?
Yeah, and Cluny is a monastery. We talk about Cluny in the book. Cluny is very important to the church reform of the 10th and 11th centuries that leads to the end of lay investiture or lay domination of the church, or at least to the reduction of it. It was Duke William of Aquitaine who founded Cluny, Duke William the Pious, and the Duke wanted Cluny to be independent of lay control, which was very rare in the time, and so he put it under the direct authority of the Pope, who at that time was, I think John the 12th, as you mentioned, one of the most wickedest popes of the Middle Ages, but he chartered the monastery of Cluny, which became this center of spiritual renewal, and the Cluniac movement strove, one of their points of their reform was the moral life of the clergy and re-emphasizing clerical celibacy and ending simony, which were all things that the Pope of that age was involved with. So God always brings good out of bad.
So, ladies and gentlemen, buy the book. You gain knowledge. You'll find peace because you'll know that the church has been through this before, and she's still the spotless bride of Christ.
Yes, and I want to encourage folks, if you want to follow some of my find some of my other writings, you can visit my website at www.phillipcampbell.net. That's Philip with 2 L's. phillipcampbell.net. You can find a comprehensive list of my books and publications, everything I've done for TAN and other publishers as well. And if you are on social media, you can follow me at Philip Campbell, author teacher on Facebook. That's Philip Campbell, author teacher. Look for that page and follow along for lots of history memes and historical minutia.
There you go. Appreciate it. Yeah, we'll have all that in the show notes for anybody that wants to click on those to go to those links they mentioned. Again, buy the book and books from Philip. Buy all his books, as I said with Charles. Buy everything. Philip, appreciate you being on, and take care, man. We'll talk to you later.
All right. Thanks, Steve.
Bye-bye.